Finally, we have an American politician telling the truth about Ukrainian war.
What did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China.
See, some people still thought it's about protecting democracy. It is not. Actually, I respect this guy saying it out loud. It's okay to see what you want. Sell expensive weapons, gain assets. This is the American way. From US perspective, it's nothing wrong about it. It's tremendous profit. But for the Ukrainians, it's another story. Fight to the last Ukrainian, they said. It's not about protecting democracy. It's about assets and critical minerals. For the past 3 days, Ukrainians had successful counteroffensive in Vovchansk, and Russians had a major success in Avdiivka direction. Today's report covers information from June the 8th to June the 11th. Russians had an interesting operation in north of Sumi. On June the 9th, the Chechen Ahmad crossed the border and entered this village, Rizivka. This is a Wagner soldier showing the flag in this village. We know there are more than 3,000 Wagner soldiers joined Chechen Ahmad in April 2024. Where is this village located? It's around 50 kilometers north of Sumi, and it's about 180 kilometers away from Kharkiv. So is this part of the Russian summer offensive? I think not yet. We can see there are only Chechen Ahmad and former Wagner soldiers. What does it mean? These are mainly infantries, not armored troops. If the Russians want a surprise attack and attack Sumi, they will have armored vehicles. So this is more like a probing attack to divert the Ukrainian reserves. On June the 10th, the Russian soldiers already retreat back to Russian borders. We will see if the Russians will have more actions here. In the Kharkiv direction, Ukrainians had counteroffensive near Lukyansk and Huboki and recaptured some areas here. There's no major change in the contact line. In Vovchansk direction, for the past 4 days, Ukrainians continue to push north of Vovchansk. The first time the Ukrainians crossed the river and enter North Vovchansk is on May the 23rd. Now 20 days passed. They still haven't pushed Russians out of this town. Ukrainians have more reinforcement coming. The 36th Marine Brigade. They used to be the 36th Naval Infantry Brigade, which was encircled in Mariupol, but they rebuilt this brigade in late 2022. In early June, they arrived in Vovchansk for reinforcement. The 82nd Brigade pulled out of the combat, and 36th Marine Brigade took their place. We can see the Ukrainians are putting a lot of forces in Vovchansk, but it's unlikely that the Ukrainians can retake North Vovchansk. There are two main problems. First, lack of armored vehicles, and the second is you don't have enough supply. It's difficult for armored vehicles to cross the river, and the Russians bomb the supply line every day. You don't have artillery advantage, and you still want to cross the river. This is not a smart decision. That's why I said it's not a military decision, but a political decision. The president of Ukraine wants some good results before the Swiss Peace Summit. Is it worthy to sacrifice your elite forces here? For the Russian side, it's still 83rd Air Assault Brigade fighting in North Vovchansk. Besides, 138 Motor Rifle Brigade are also operating here. The Ukrainian COD report also shows that the Russian Several Operational Group is still preparing to cross the Volcha River. In the Chinese ancient warfare, there's a saying, if your enemy is stronger than you and he is in defense mode, you need to be very careful. That's what the Ukrainians need to be worried about. In Bakhmut direction, the Russians continue offensive. Now Novooleksandrivka is almost completely under Russian control, but the Ukrainians are still not retreating. There are heavy fighting in the village. On June the 10th, the Russians captured this high ground, so now the Ukrainians are in a bad position. It's very likely this town will fall soon. In the southern part, the Russians continue offensive and getting close to Rostovivka. The Russians' 106th Airborne Division is the main force here, and still it doesn't look like a major offensive yet. In Chasiv Yar direction, Ukrainians carried out counteroffensive and re-entered Kalinina on June the 8th. Now there are heavy fighting in this village. The Ukrainians know that if this village falls, they will lose all the ground east of the canal, so they continue carried out counteroffensive. The Russians carried out successful offensive in this micro-district. From June the 9th to June the 11th, the Russian 98th Airborne Division almost captured 60% of the micro-district. The Ukrainian COD report shows that the enemy is using the tunnels for tactical maneuver. I found there are reports saying Russians transferred number 7th Airborne Division here, but I double-checked it's not the 7th Airborne Division, it's the 7th Assault Brigade, which is a former Wagner group. They have been fighting here for more than 3 months. The two most important positions east of the canal for the Ukrainians are Kalinina and the Micro District. If any one of these falls, the other will not hold. It's very likely the Russians will capture Micro District in the coming week. If the Russians successfully capture the areas east of the canal, it will be much easier to attack the city because the Russians don't have to go 5 kilometers from Bakhmut to attack. They can gather troops in Micro District to attack Chasiv Yar. Here the Russians' main force is 98th Airborne Division, the 200 Brigade and Wagner soldiers. On the Ukrainian side, the 41st Brigade, number 5th Assault Brigade and 93rd Air Assault Brigade are operating here. In Donetsk direction, the Russians had a major success. We can see the Ukrainians' next defense line is here, from north to south. And a very important village is Novooleksandrivka. On June the 9th, the Russians get into this village and capture the first line of the buildings. On June the 10th, the Russians captured the whole east part of this village. And on June the 11th, the Ukrainians retreat and Russians captured the whole village. So it only took less than 3 days for the Russians to capture this whole village. Such an important position should not fall this fast. I saw there were sayings that some Ukrainian troops just retreat without order and didn't tell others. That's why the whole defense collapsed. This is a huge mistake for the Ukrainians. This village is so critical for two reasons. First, the Ukrainians' next defense line is already broken. The Russians can quickly expand the territory to the west or to the south, just like what they did on Ocheretyne. And the second reason, this village is only 7 kilometers away from the T-504 road. This is a major supply road from Pokrovsk to Chasiv Yar. If the Russians successfully capture this village and expand the territory, the Russians' artillery will be able to threaten this supply line. We don't know what exactly happened in the Ukrainian army, but maybe we will see some reports soon. Here the Russians' 35th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade are operating, along with the 30th Brigade, both from the Central Military District. In Sokil direction, the Russians successfully get into this village on June the 10th, and now there are heavy fightings in this village. The Russians haven't captured it yet. The Russians' number 15th Brigade is operating here. In the southern part, the Russians also get into Novopokrovsk. In Umanske direction, the Russians start pushing to the west and to the north. So here we can see the Russians are pushing west every day. And the most important advancement is in Novooleksandrivka. Because the Ukrainians put out so much troops to support Kharkiv, the whole eastern line is weakened. That's why the Russians can make advancement every day. In Kharkivka and Krasnohorivka, there are fightings for past 4 days, but there are no major change in the contact line. In Konstantinivka direction, the Russians finished clearing up this village, Pereskovivka, and they start pushing to the west. Some Russian troops already reached the outskirts of this town, but Ukrainians had counteroffensive. It's very likely the Russians will attack this town soon. The Russians' 20th Division is positioned here. This is the main force of the Russians' 8th Guard Combined Army. To conclude, the Ukrainians continue offensive in Kharkiv with little gains. Because the Ukrainians committed so much forces north of Kharkiv, the whole east and southern line are weakened. That's why the Russians are able to make some gains. It's likely the Russians will capture Kalinina and Micro District east of Chasiv Yar soon. And the Ukrainians made a huge mistake for giving up Novooleksandrivka so quickly. It's very likely we will see the Russians expand this territory soon, and this gives the Russians a very good starting position for the summer offensive. Last but not least, I saw there are still comments saying I'm a Chinese bot and a Chinese propaganda channel. For me, it's very funny to see. Many years ago, I used to be a student in American college. I met many American friends and also exchange students like me from all over the world. Those days are still one of the best memories in my life. But look at you guys now. What's going on in America? One party is suing the former president of United States, and the other party is suing current president's son. Sometimes I talk to my friends in New York and then ask, what the hell is this? Don't you miss the good old days? And he said, no, we're not going back. We're going to civil war. That's all for today. This is Jason Jiang from Shenzhen, China. Thank you for watching and see you next time.